Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Recreating Safely During Fire Season. Very excited to have you all here this morning. We're going to give folks a minute or so to join before we get started. So thank you very much for being here this morning. Very happy to have you. All right, I see some folks have flooded in this morning. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. You are here in the Recreating Safely During Fire Season training with Community Nature Connection and Michael Garcia. We will be offering this training in Spanish and English, and so I'm going to turn it over to our interpreters.
Good morning, this is a bilingual message and it will be repeated in English. Hola, mi nombre es Karina López y esta es Simone Rivadeneira. Este es un mensaje bilingüe que será repetido en inglés. Somos miembros de la Red Justicia de Lingüística de Comunidades Justas y vamos a interpretar el taller de hoy día entre inglés y español. Un ambiente bilingüe virtual exitoso depende de todos, no solamente de los y las intérpretes. Pueden ayudar teniendo en cuenta algunos puntos. Hablen claramente para asegurar que les podamos escuchar. Hablen a un ritmo moderado y tengan cuidado de no hablar demasiado rápido, especialmente si están leyendo, para que podamos alcanzar a interpretar todo. No queremos que se pierdan de nada. Solamente debe hablar una persona a la vez para que no tengamos que decidir a quién interpretar y hablen en el idioma en el que se sientan más cómodos y cómodas. Pedimos que las personas bilingües no cambien de un idioma a otro debido a las limitaciones de tecnología con la que estamos trabajando. En un momento, el anfitrión activará la función de interpretación y en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla podrá seleccionar el idioma en el que desea escuchar el taller, en inglés o en español. Esto le permitirá escuchar cuando los oradores hablen en ambos idiomas, pero en el idioma de su preferencia. Si está en un teléfono o en una tableta, necesita encontrar el menú de 3 puntos y seleccionar interpretación de idiomas. Si está teniendo algún problema con su conexión, mande un mensaje por el chat al anfitrión para resolver el problema. Gracias.
Hello, my name is Simoneri Odaneira, and I'm here with Karina Lopez. We are representing the Just Communities Language Justice Network. We will be providing interpretation between English and Spanish for today's workshop. A successful virtual bilingual environment depends on all of us, not just the interpreters. You can help by keeping a few things in mind. Speak clearly to ensure we can hear you. Speak at a moderate pace. Please be careful not to speak too fast, especially if you are reading. Only one person should speak at a time, so we don't have to choose who to interpret for. Speak in whichever language you feel most comfortable in. We ask that bilingual folks do not switch languages from one to another in the middle of a sentence due to the limitations of the technology we are working with. In a moment, the host will turn on the interpretation feature, and at the bottom right corner of your screen, you'll be able to select the language you want to hear the workshop in, English or Spanish. If you are not bilingual, please select a language. If you are on a phone or tablet, you'll need to find the 3-dot menu and select language interpretation. If you have any trouble with the interpretation feature, send a message to the host through the chat so the issue can be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone and Karina. And thank you everybody for being here this morning. So we're going to get started. Thanks for joining us. This is Recreating Safely During Fire Season with Michael Garcia. My name is Celeste Gasparic, and I am the Training Institute Manager with Community Nature Connection. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining you today from home in Northeast LA, the ancestral village of Otsunga of the Tongva Gabrielino peoples. I would like to invite you all to type your introduction into the chat. We would love to hear where you are joining us from today, your name, your pronouns, if you're representing an organization. And we encourage you to share what ancestral land you're joining from today. If you're not sure, you can look it up and I will drop a link in the chat where you can do that. Closed captioning is available for this training. If you would like to see the captions, you can click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Subtitles. All right, so before we begin, I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Community Nature Connection operates is the ancestral lands of the Tongva, Gabrielino, Tataviam, and Chumash peoples, the original stewards and custodians of this territory. We recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Community Nature Connection strives to create partnerships and collaborate with local tribes to expand equitable outdoor programming to all. So for those who are not familiar with our organization, Community Nature Connection is a nonprofit, community-based organization. We serve the Los Angeles area. Our mission is to increase access to the outdoors for communities impacted by racial, socioeconomic, and disability injustices. We do this by eliminating barriers through advocacy, community-centered programming, and workforce development. The Training Institute is one of our programs from Community Nature Connection, and the Training Institute provides training and workforce development opportunities aiming to increase knowledge and skills in the naturalist, interpretive, and outdoor recreation fields. So for today's training, just a tiny bit of Zoom housekeeping. I would like to invite everybody to ask questions, and you can enter your questions as they arise into the Q&A box. And you're welcome to type your questions in English or in Spanish into the Q&A box. So I think that that's quite enough talking from me. I am very excited to have Michael Garcia here today. He is a repeat trainer here with the Training Institute and a great supporter of our work. Michael is the Leave No Trace Southern California advocate, and he brings a wealth of knowledge about the outdoor and recreation fields. So take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Celeste, and welcome everybody. Buenos dias, good morning. It's a great day here in Southern California or wherever you're joining from us with us today. I'm going to go ahead and pop up the presentation. So I'll be sharing that with y'all. Let's see here. Let me give a new share here. It's like, okay. Y'all could see that up there? Yes? Okay.
Incendios. Por eso es tan importante.
Okay.
We lost your screen share, Michael.
For some reason, it's not letting me go into the bigger mode. I've had this happen before. Sorry, y'all. There we go. Sorry for the hiccup there, y'all, but it is virtual. Sometimes it does happen.
That looks good.
So welcome to this presentation. I did quite a bit of research, covers a lot of ground. It goes into two types of presentation. The first one's going to be going over just basic fire introduction and what, how fire behaves. And then we'll have the second part, which is the recreating safely during the fire season. So just keeping that in mind. If there is a burning question during a slide, by all means in the chat, go ahead and write it down and Celeste will relay that. And I'll give a little bit of time before I go on to the next slide if there's a burning question. Like I said, no pun intended, y'all. I want to start off with fire ecology and what that is, but I really want to look at this quote here and the importance of fire. Though fire is often erroneously thought of disruptive of normal conditions, it is actually a predictably regular, if episodic, ecological process. There's a lot of words in there, y'all, but I really want to just drive home that we see in the news how fire is destructive, but fire is a very important part for our ecosystems. And fire replenishes, rejuvenates. Some species won't even replicate or reproduce without fire. So I kind of want to have that always at the base, y'all, of today's presentation, that we will be looking at that as fire being a very, very important part. I know it's kind of hard to see through that when you see a lot of people losing their homes and things like that. But with our next presentation that we have in 2 weeks, you'll be seeing how we can mitigate that when we are at our homes. So let me continue on. I want to talk about a fire regime, and what that basically is, it's the general patterns and effects of fires over time and area. And I have about 6 bullet points, but in no way is this kind of all there is to the fire regime. There are other variables, but for an introduction standpoint, this is plenty you'll need to know. Patterns of seasonality is the first one. When fires burn, the time of year. Before we used to have fires, they're fairly predictable. They ran through summer, through late fall, and that was it. But now we're starting to see over time with climate change that the seasons are really becoming longer. And a lot of people are saying, wow, we don't even really have fire seasons anymore. It's year round. The next bullet point is the fire return interval. How often do fires come back to a particular place? This is really important with some species. They need this to return for them to kind of propagate and become what they are in their area. So it's a very important part of it. The size of a fire, how large the perimeter is, and we'll be looking at some perimeters when we get to our resources part of the slide. But these are even getting really big. And I have a slide to show you that, how they've grown over the years, recently in the last 20 years. The intensity of fire is how hot that fire will burn. So within a fire, it could really burn really hot in one area and then not burn as hot in another place. So it's not all uniform when we have fires. Severity of the fire is the vegetation and soil loss. How much and how badly did that burn? How much did it affect the soil? So things like that is really, it's important to know from the standpoint of kind of like when you're a scientist or when you're looking at stuff like this, that things are like nature, they are different in certain areas. And that's very important as far as when we get into how our native people have controlled fire over the thousands of years. Spatial complexity, like I said, various severity levels within a fire's perimeter. So that can really get into some really kind of just complicated models. And just to look at this as a fire regime. Anybody have any questions on fire regime? I know there's a lot of stuff here, but it's basic, pretty basic stuff from that side. And then you'll see how it ties in the importance of why that knowing this is important. Any questions, Celeste, on this in the chat?
No questions yet, but just as a reminder, as your questions arise, please do use the Q&A box, and that'll help us monitor your questions as they come up. Thank you.
Thank you. So fire adapted species, talked a little bit about earlier, but some species, you know, they're either inhibited by fire, they're sensitive to fire, and then some species, they need fire. The giant sequoia is one of them. Without fire, we don't have our giant sequoias. So when you go visit like Sequoia National Monument or Sequoia National Park, you'll see a lot of the fires are, the trees are scarred over thousands of years that they've been alive of fire. So looking at that, how species adapt over years, thousands of millennia, it's a really interesting thing how our fire adapted species have lived through these eons of fires. And it's a very important part. Some fires get rid of things that are causing problems. Let's talk about the bark beetle infestation with forests. If a fire doesn't roll through there, they might get everything. So even on that scale, where fire is a big fire, we call a crown fire, a devastating fire, it's probably the only way we're going to get rid of the big dead trees that have been infected by bark beetle, which is unfortunate, but sometimes that has to happen. When I did my research, I looked on our vegetation and food source management with fire. Over 9,000 year history of vegetation management by Native people, used to protect the villages. If they cleared out areas, they could protect their villages from what we'll be talking about with fire, with Ranger Tim. Just like people have their dwellings, that's how they would protect dwellings as well, by burning the vegetation around. Also grasslands and meadows, they would burn these constantly over cyclical time so that they wouldn't convert into shrubland or forest. It was advantageous to have open range for our Native people. Stimulate growth of seeds and bulbs is probably the biggest thing, one of the most important things. Over years, over thousands of years, the experience and observation of knowing when a fire came around, wow, it really grew back. And it grew back even more lush. So looking at from that side, insect and fungus control with acorn protection. So with these fires, oak trees are fairly resilient with fire. So even like smoke will stimulate some growth in some species. So this fungus control and insect control fires were set as well. Increase the foraging around. If it wasn't so lush, things could be seen better. Also used for driving game. With less cover, game was easier sought and seen. And I was talking about that burning in a cyclical manner. Well, they knew that things would come back, fires would come back to an area. So knowing that cyclical manner and not just doing it like every 5-10 years, they knew when to do fires and then rotating the lands that were burned. Not just one area was burned, but areas. So it was mimicked how nature took care of it. So it was interesting in my research to see that. And fires were kept small and specific. This was not big crown fires. We very well knew that big fires would cause some problems. So the small fires were controlled and done. Over 100 years, 120 years of suppression by our US Forest Service has shown that, yeah, when we go out there and we suppress fires, everything that we see, it's probably not a good thing. But what's driving our factor right now is climate change. And that's really the big takeaway I have for our kind of next slide. Any questions on vegetation and food management with fire? So I'll go ahead and proceed. Here's some just basic fire triangle, what a fire needs. And these are the three elements, they're kind of things it needs to go. And one of them is oxygen. I like to say how it breathes, how the fire, breathes and how it goes. Heat is the next one. Energy, how it lives. So it can have an ignition point. That's what heat will do. So a lot of times you'll see this triangle under heat, it will have ignition source. Well, in nature, one of them is lightning. It could also be a volcanic eruption. It could be sunlight itself. When we get involved, it could be a down power line and someone who carelessly has a campfire and lets go out of control or doesn't put it out. 90% of wildfires are caused by humans. So this heat one is really kind of like on us, like kind of starting fires. However, those natural fires out there are very important. Without fires, like I said earlier, we wouldn't be having this discussion of why fire is important. Fuel, what it eats. So you'll see it's trees, shrubs, grass, whatever can ignite is your fuel. And sadly, it has been homes where people live, unfortunately. Here's our fire behavior. What drives a wildfire? We have weather, wind, topography, and vegetation. Weather, temperature, and relative humidity really kind of drive that fire. On a hot day where the relative humidity is low, under 20%, sometimes it's under 10%, okay? But then when we add wind to that, then we have what's going to give the fire some breath, some oxygen. And those two kind of together would really cause some problems. And some of those problems are like a red flag alert, where wind is high, temperatures are high, and relative humidity is very low. So topography, how the land is, also kind of drives what a fire does. The vegetation and fuel moisture is huge right now. We like to call that the X factor, because vegetation and fuels are drying out sooner than we ever seen before. We just had the hottest, I do believe, July on record. So just to think about that here in California, the winds that we normally would come in fall, the Santa Ana and the Diablo, well, we haven't even gotten there, and we have fires that are humongous right now, big fires, without the crazy winds yet. So thinking about that, it's a little bit daunting, but hopefully our winds won't be bad this fall. Crossing our fingers on that one. I want to show you like recent trends of kind of what's going on with historical versus recent. And one of them for me is that when I look at the season, typically June to October historically, now we're having fires during the holiday season, early February. That has all really changed and really kind of put a real big spin on all this in fire suppression and trying to get through our fire season. Fire severity and intensity has increased in the recent years. They're burning hotter, they're burning faster than ever seen. The vegetation, fuel is drying out earlier. I touched upon this earlier. Temperatures are really going up, and the lack of moisture are on the rise on vegetation, especially after these 2 years of drought. Fires are increasing in size and frequency. And then the recent fires have really grown erratic. We're really seeing examples of these pyrocumulonimbus clouds that are going way up into the air, causing their own weather. And the pyro vortex, or the fire NATO, it's called, and fire just creating its own weather with lightning and explosion. Just really, this is happening more frequent than fires of the past. I think the big one, again, that X factor is that the vegetation is really, in the past, did not dry out so quickly. But now earlier in the season, it's really drying out a lot sooner. Any questions on our kind of like our trends that we've had or things that people have noted themselves? I mean, I go out to Malibu Creek State Park and I show people poison oak. And what I seen in September, I'm seeing it now here in August. The leaves are already turning red and they look like they're already in fall colors. So just like that little micro thing that I see out there, I'm noticing the differences.
We do have a question that came in about human-made fires and kind of a scale. How badly do human-made fires or human-started fires disrupt the ecosystem?
It really is, yeah, they've done studies, and when I've through my research, they don't know the number yet. It's still kind of, they're still trying to get a handle on this one, but we know that 90% of the fires are caused by us, but how much of those fires would have happened without us there? Well, people will go, well, it's pretty easy, it's 90%. Well, also remember there's climate change and what we put out into the air. So the big driver right now is this whole climate change that's happening. And that is caused by us. You know, it's up for debate, but I think people know that it's pretty much, I think it's us. But to answer that question is really difficult without getting all the data in. But I would tell you that the fires are just bigger and causing much more destruction at the hands of whether we're doing it or if lightning does it. Some of the biggest fires, like the Lightning Complex fire, the August Complex fire, that was lightning driven. So, but was it lightning driven because of climate change? Those are the answers for our scientists to keep going and exploring to see what that percentage truly is. So answering that question is a really weighted question right now in regards to the percentage that we cause the total destruction and damage. But it's definitely leaning towards our climate change disruption that we are encountering with us humans. I don't know if that answered the question, but it was like, you know, we're still looking at the research. Maybe Ranger Tim has an answer for that one. Shall we proceed, y'all? Right.
Yes.
Here's some of the biggest fires in kind of our recent history. There's that August Complex fire. It was lightning caused, but still under investigation. It really takes a while for them to know. Unfortunately, the Dixie fire is still burning, and this is kind of in acres, 747,000 acres gone and still active, still growing. The Dixie fire is at 45% containment. That probably won't be put out till late September, they're hoping. If you take a look at this chart, you see that the majority of the biggest fires, pretty much 2020, 2017, we have the Cedar Fire 2003 in San Diego and the Rush Fire 2012. And these are only just the top 10. There's a list of top 20, and the majority of those fires lie within this century after 2000. So we're now in our kind of the second part of this presentation, and it's the part that kind of the title goes with regards to fire and visiting those areas when you go out there, what to look for and how to plan for that. So before we go into that, is there any questions regarding this first half that we have? Any burning questions that you may have regarding what was presented earlier?
I'll give folks a moment to enter any questions into the Q&A, but there aren't any right now. So I'll let you know, Michael. As they
Okay,
come
cool.
in.
We'll continue. So we're going to start this off watching a video. So I'll make sure that I have my share sound is on. Yeah.
Se acercan los días soleados y calurosos, y para disfrutarlos en todo su esplendor, nada mejor que hacer alguna de las actividades al aire libre más populares, como es acampar.
Cuando vas a acampar, es importante que no solo lleves contigo una tienda de campaña, luces, comida y mucha agua, sino que además vayas preparado para encender y apagar una fogata correctamente. Y es eso lo que US Forest Service quiere enseñarte en este video. Hacer una fogata mientras acampas no solo te permite mantener caliente la temperatura de tu cuerpo, sino que además puede ayudarte a ahuyentar algunas plagas y, por supuesto, cocinar un delicioso plato de comida.
Sin embargo, el descontrol del fuego puede ocasionar grandes incendios. Por eso es tan importante que sepas cómo hacerlo.
A continuación, te mostraremos los pasos que debes seguir para hacer una fogata segura y potente. Dentro del aro para fogatas, coloca 2 troncos de leña paralelos como base de la fogata a una distancia aproximada de 50 centímetros entre cada uno y rellena el espacio entre los troncos con hojas y ramas secas o papel periódico. Posiciona 2 troncos más encima, en dirección opuesta a los primeros, y rellena el espacio de la misma manera. Sigue construyendo la fogata hacia arriba, rellenando los espacios con hojas y ramas secas. Enciende la punta de varios pedazos de papel periódico enrollados y colócalos en el centro de la fogata donde están las hojas y ramas secas. Cúbrelo bien con papel o leña para que el viento no lo apague. Mueve los pedazos que se vayan encendiendo con ramas hasta que toda la madera se encienda.
Una vez que hayas disfrutado de tu acogedora fogata, es muy importante que sepas cómo apagarla para evitar posibles incendios.
Estas son algunas recomendaciones para apagar la fogata de forma eficaz. Si es posible, deja que la fogata se queme por completo hasta convertirse en cenizas. Ahoga la fogata con un balde de agua lentamente. No lo tires ni vuelques, ya que podrías crear una nube de humo y cenizas que son peligrosas. Usa una pala para mezclar las cenizas y el agua. Tira un balde de agua nuevamente a la fogata o utiliza tierra o arena para apagar por completo el fuego. Revisa que el lugar donde se realizó el fuego esté frío antes de irte.
Sigue los pasos que te acabamos de indicar para que tú también puedas disfrutar de un campamento con una fogata acogedora y sobre todo segura. Gracias.
Para más consejos de cómo encender o apagar una fogata, visita la página que aparece en la descripción de este video.
So any questions on that? I kind of flipped the script on that because it was done in Spanish. Willamette National Forest presented that. It's pretty new. It's about 2 months old now. But any questions regarding that? I know there was quick translations there at the bottom. I think the big takeaway there is stirring that fire. I'd like to see it stirred a little bit more with the shovel. You'll do that when you see your California fire permit. We'll talk about that coming up on the slide, but you'll see more of that. Any other questions there, Celeste? We're good? All right, cool. So part of your planning here is going to be risk management. So anywhere, we call risk management like safety, freedom from harm. And we kind of pretty much know that that's not a 100% thing. Anywhere you go, when you get in your car to drive, realize that your safety is not guaranteed. And you have to either make two decisions. One of them is, avoid the risk totally by not going, or minimizing those risks, or, mitigating them for a potential bad outcome. So here's our identify the hazards, parts of the risk management model, assess the risk potential, choose to avoid or the risk or mitigate the risk, as I said before, and have an emergency plan. This is one where people, I don't see that a lot of people will have that when they go out into the out of doors, to have some kind of plan, a risk management plan. And Ranger Tim, in his presentation, he'll talk more about that in the homestead. So I'll be mostly focusing on what we do when we're caught outside. So this presentation will go down that vein. So planning. When you plan, you're going to go on recreation.gov or visit some of the United States Forest Service websites, and you're going to see some of the regulations that are out there and the restrictions. Now, if you were to go on the Angeles National Forest website today, you would see that it's in extreme conditions, meaning that there are no fires allowed and no stove uses allowed, even in designated areas. There's only a few places you can go on forest land and even have a fire at all. In a lot of our forests. So just knowing and being aware of those regulations. Also recently burned areas, the Bobcat fire came through, and there's places that are closed, and those are very sensitive areas. So even on that side of it, there's no fire, but there could be dangers in there. So just think about that when you're out there making your plan. Also, if the danger is high, once again, if burning is not allowed, you're not going to be able to do it. So don't plan to cook over a fire. In this incident, you wouldn't have any way of cooking a meal if you're backpacking. So basically what they've said is, if you are going to go backpacking, it's not going to be in the Angeles forest because of the extreme fire danger. So even that side of it. And then, of course, have that emergency plan before you leave. Have notification where you let people know where you're going, exit strategies and stuff like that. Avoidance and actions. If a fire is near, what do you do? So let's say I did all the planning and everything is cool. I got, I did all I could do, but then I noticed there's a fire. And the first thing I'm going to do is kind of be aware of the weather conditions. Which way is the wind blowing? If I look at a column, if I see a column of smoke, which way is that column bent? Is it bent kind of going towards me, knowing that the fire is probably going to be coming your way? So you're going to move way away from the fire. Here it says a mile. I'd say a lot more than that. This is a mile or more, right? So as far as you can as possible. Follow your emergency plan. If your emergency plan is, hey, if there was a fire over here at this trailhead and that's where it started, where do we exit? And hey, I'm over here on this side. We're at a different trailhead. Do you think you can come pick me up? There's a fire, that kind of thing, where you would have that kind of dialogue with somebody. Really have that alternate route and alternate plan. When I plan going out backpacking, or I'm really far in the Sierra Nevadas, we always have an evacuation plan prior, whether it be fire, whether it be an earthquake plan even out there, because there could be a landslide. So fire is just like any other thing that you would have to plan for, any kind of danger or risk out there. Any fires you see, report those immediately. Even if you think, someone's already reported, go ahead. They don't mind getting another call from someone. I talked about this earlier, but avoid hiking through recent burn areas. A lot of people go, well, it should be okay. Well, there's a lot of dead trees or dead snags that can blow over in a windstorm. Also, the fine particulate matter that is on the ground, if there's wind, it's going to get into your nose, into your throat. It's not going to be too pleasurable. Also, the roots of trees, they also burn. So they cause these big trenches. You'll be walking, if you're not on a trail and you're just walking, you can step in one of those trenches left over by a root that was big enough to leave a hole there. So you have to really kind of have your eye open for those and what you do. It's not just when it's burning, it's also after the burn. I think the big thing that kind of we forget about is smoke. A fire can be hundreds of miles away. And look at now, right now we have smoke coming all the way from Northern California. This is what, 450 miles away as the crow flies, coming down here, and our air quality, I can see it, it's starting to go down because we did get a little bit some northern winds coming in that came and blew from the northeast. But making sure that you understand that that smoke likes to settle in valleys and places where you're like, okay, we're pretty safe here. You know, we're 200 miles away from the fire. And all of a sudden you just have this smoky valley. It's like, where's this coming from? It's synonymous to like when I was out there in for the solar eclipse in Oregon. And that year they were having a lot of fires up there. And we get to the Rogue Valley and I'm like, where's all this smoke from? And the fire was quite a distance away, but it just likes to settle in those areas. So just be mindful of that. And we have some resources for you to check that can help. Not only, you know, is it unpleasant, but it can exacerbate if you have a respiratory condition. So, you know, really take a good look at that. One good resource is airnow.gov. And I'll let Celeste share her experience with airnow.gov.
I became really obsessed with this app, AirNow. You can access it just on the website or airnow.gov, or you can download the app. And last year when the Bobcat fire came through, we were all quarantined and I was pregnant. So I was in like the sensitive population to smoke. So I had to pay more attention to my exposure to smoke. So I would check the app and it would be, you know, air quality up in the red, dark red zone, like 100, high hundreds AQI. And so I basically just stayed inside during the 112 degree heat wave when it was so smoky and I had all my doors closed and no air conditioning and an air filter running. So that was definitely like the rock bottom of my summer last year. But I do say a big thanks to using that app just because it did let me know like, okay, now we're like back up to just unhealthy and not severely unhealthy, or we're back into moderate. And so I can go outside, I can go for a walk, I can feel like good and safe about it. So I definitely recommend checking that out. And it's really cool because you can type in your location. So I was looking at home at my zip code at home, but if you're planning a trip to Kings Canyon or to Tahoe, you can type in the zip code up there and you can get the air quality information somewhere where you're planning to go, which will help you determine whether or not it's a good idea. There's also, I'm not sure like how awesomely accurate it is, but there is a forecast feature. So you can see in the next few days, is it going to get better?
Thank you, Celeste, for sharing that. So if you're out there and you're out of cell service and the app is not going to function, well, here's some basic rules about being out there. If the visibility is less than 3 miles, avoid prolonged and heavy exertion. Well, you know, what's 3 miles, you know, so you could probably just use a little bit of common sense and go, wow, this not feeling too good. I can smell it. It's just all around. You probably should like, you know, call it a day and, you know, think about it. They really want you to use this 10 miles of visibility, more so like it's just a you can see far enough, the air quality should be okay. So it's just more of a gauge like that when I came across doing my research. But use that common sense. If it's just feeling too smoky, y'all, you know, it ain't gonna be good for you. But it's nice to have those tools, those specific tools like airnow.gov.
And we did have a question come in. It came in just kind of right before you got onto the smoke slide, so you may have answered at least part of it. But Joseph writes, in terms of outdoor air quality and camping in the next few weeks in Kings Canyon, how do we determine based on altitude and other factors what and which activities we should do? As in like hiking or kind of strenuous level of how strenuous the activity is.
When we're in like the moderate range, and you'll see that when we'll show you in airnow.gov at the resource page, you'll actually be able to see that. But I like to say that if I don't have a respiratory problem, I should be okay with the moderate air quality, but knowing that, you know, the next day you might wake up, take that big deep breath and go, oh, I don't think I should have went out there. Now, as far as elevation, that's a great question, because if you look at elevation right now, the air quality up in the Angeles is worse than down here with this current thing that's going on, especially when we have that new fire that's in the Lido Creek area. So, you know, knowing that, oh, I'm going to go up to the mountains and get fresh air. Well, a lot of times that fresh air, that some of that, those particulates will rise high, you know, using orographic lift, we call it. So, yeah, so elevation, like in Kings Canyon, they, you know, if they look at like the least, like the best quality air quality, it's definitely not going to be in Kings Canyon if there's a fire close by. Remember, Kings Canyon is what it is. It has these valleys where it settles in. You can be at Kings Canyon at an elevation of 8,000 feet, and then the valley below is, you know, 4,000, and it just settles in there. So you can be way back in Kings Canyon and have a lot of smoke just settle in. And then all of a sudden, wind comes through and there goes the smoke. You wake up, and where'd all the smoke go? So it has a lot of variable when you're up in the mountains. I hope I answered the question on that, how that relates. But you should use your common sense about how your physiology is when air quality is not that great.
Yes, and I would just add that, like Michael said, how determine whether or not you or anyone in your group belongs to the sensitive groups. And so that would include anybody with a respiratory health issue, or elderly people, or children also belong to the sensitive group. So if there's any kids, you might want to reduce the amount of activity depending on the smoke, and then pregnant people too. So
good points. So this more is like, what happens if I get caught in a fire? And there's really a couple things you can do. You gotta, you know, determine your escape route and your safe zones where you can wait and wait it out. Fire moves faster uphill, so move downhill. So if you're up on a ridge and you see a fire, you know, coming your way, try to get down, kind of like almost parallel to the fire if you can. If you get on the other side, if you're at a ridge, you go down the other side and seek shelter. Now, you're looking for areas that have already been burnt, so that could help you. Large meadows and treeless areas, a body of water or swampy area would be a good place. Above tree line in a boulder field. So if I was up high, say I was in the Sierra Nevadas and I was at 9,600 feet, I'd go probably to a pass that's above tree line, and you know, go there first instead of going down into a valley where there could be a lot of trees and a lot of vegetation. So I find myself a lot of times in alpine zones above tree line, and you know, a fire that comes through there is not going to really be that big because there's a lot of rocks up in the Sierras. However, there are places where there's a lot of vegetation even above 9,000 feet. A good one, I guess a good thing, if anybody's been up to Mount Baldy, you see where the trees stop and it's just like a moonscape up there. Well, that would actually be pretty safe if you were in a fire to be at the summit of Baldy, because there's really not a lot of stuff around it to burn. But the safest place would be far from the fire, of course. And I guess the bottom line or the takeaway here for fire-prone areas, y'all, plan ahead, take the precautions to avoid getting caught in a wildfire. The best way to survive a fire while recreating in the outdoors is to avoid it. If there is a high potential for a wildfire or there's already a fire burning, it is never a bad call to change or postpone your trip. I know a lot of people want to, I want to do this trip, I have to do it, but if there's a fire around, it's not, I don't think it's worth, that place will probably always be there. Maybe not like you envisioned it after a fire, but you're not going to be there if you get caught in one. So just think about, the consequence, and that's pretty much the bottom line for that one. And that was taken from Brooke Ortel. I took that from her article she has, and I have that as well as our resource as well. I'm going to end this presentation kind of with the collection of firewood. And this is from the Leave No Trace kind of ethics. So I want to share that with y'all.
For many, campfires are a big part of having a successful camping trip, and part of a campfire is finding firewood. In some areas, collecting wood from the surrounding ecosystem is allowed to fuel a fire. Today we will be talking about how we can gather firewood responsibly and with minimal impact to the environment around us. First, we always want to plan ahead and prepare to ensure we can not only have a fire, but that firewood collection is okay. Check with land managers for guidance on this. If we can collect firewood, we want to make sure we keep the 4 Ds in mind. These are 4 words that start with the letter D that help us to figure out what wood we can sustainably take from nature. The 4 Ds are dead, down, dinky, and distant. We want to collect dead wood and leave the living trees, well, living. Living wet wood doesn't burn well and actively decreases plant life for an area. One study found over 2,300 damaged living trees at backcountry campsites in Great Smoky Mountains National Park alone. Even if a tree is dead, we want to ensure it is already down and on the ground prior to using it for burning. Standing trees create important habitats for wildlife and help in preventing erosion by holding soil in place. It is best practice to avoid ever snapping limbs off of snags or dead standing trees. When collecting dead and down wood, it's a good idea to choose wood that is about the size of your wrist or smaller. Larger size logs are home to insects and small animals. They also promote the growth of lichens, fungi, and mosses that aid in sapling development. Research shows that depletion of woody debris from area for campfires can affect soil nutrients for 50 to 70 years. Small wood also burns to ash quickly, so fires are easier to put out and less of a wildfire risk. Lastly, we want to try to gather our wood over a distance and cover a large area. By spreading out this impact over a larger area, we are not removing all the woody debris from a single spot. This leaves wood behind for future campers, and others are less likely to notice the changes. By following the 4 Ds and teaching others about the importance of responsible firewood collection, we can protect natural spaces for everyone to enjoy. Remember that Leave No Trace exists on a spectrum. A lot of times, not having a fire at all is going to be the most sustainable option. However, if a fire is necessary for your trip and firewood collection is allowed, remember the 4 Ds. Leave no trace and enjoy your world.
So that brings us to our resources. Any questions on gathering wood before we get into our resources, y'all? Anybody have any questions regarding that? I think one of the big things is like, one of the important things about, if you bring fire from home, that you have the possibility of bringing an insect or something from your home that doesn't belong to the areas you're traveling. So it's a lot of times it's advised to pick up wood that's local to the camp area. And of course, what's more local than things that are on the ground that are by your campsite. A lot of places here in California don't allow for fire gathering, but there's also places that do. There's actually a California a permit for picking up wood, not just burning it, but actually you can actually take a permit out for collecting wood here in the forest. So looking at some of these resources, the California Campfire Permit, this is kind of like your homework for before you see Ranger Tim's presentation. And we have the link here. We'll share those links as well in the chat or on a follow-up for this presentation, whether it be an email or something when you do a survey. I don't know if there's gonna be a survey, but I think there is. And then NCWeb is the resource management for looking at fires that are currently burning nationwide. And then there's our Air Now for checking quality. And then a couple of the books that I use. One is Introduction to Fire in California by David Carle. He's coming on the second edition with that. It just came out. Managing Risk Outdoors and Backcountry Wildfires. That's a blogger, Brooke Ortel. And then California Indians and Their Environment goes over a lot of the things that I went over regarding fire management for the last 9,000 years. There's a lot of debate in some of the reasons why. So if you dive into that further, it'd be good education for you. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and I'll stop this share here. I don't want to show you those resources, and here's our air. Can you see that? The air gov dot. Yeah. So here's just an example. I'll ask Celeste. Celeste, what zip code are you in? We're gonna go visit. You. I want to know what your air quality is. What's your zip code?
We're gonna visit Northeast LA 90032.
Let's pretty much just type in the zip code there. And it actually shows you where that is at right now. The AQI is at 78. A good example of what it is maybe in a smoky, fiery area would be South Lake Tahoe, which is just north of the Tamarack fire. Let's see what that AQI would be. Would you want to be going to Lake Tahoe right now? Probably not, y'all, because we have a 269 AQI. That's almost bordering on just dangerous, y'all. There's no rest, like even if you have like a respirator on, it's the fine particulates in there will just get really deep into your lungs. And it's just best, like Celeste was saying, closing those doors. I don't even think we reached an AQI of 269, right, Celeste, when you were in the Bobcat fire? It was pretty unhealthy, but I don't know if it was that bad.
I think we might have inched into purple a little bit, but it was mostly in the red.
So that's kind of, and then it does have a forecast, and sometimes you'll have smoke maps, and there's all kinds of things on this website. I was looking at it just the other day, but it actually gives what is very unhealthy. What is it? Who does it harm most? And there you'll see people with a heart or lung disease, older adults, children and teens, like Celeste was saying. Here's kind of like the monitor, everyone else if you do avoid strenuous exercise. So here's kind of like answering that one question that one person had regarding Kings Canyon. You can type in the zip code for that, or just type in Sequoia Kings Canyon and see what you get. Let's see if we can get it. I mean, let's try to answer that person's question on AQ. It might not have it, Sequoia. Let's just do Sequoia National Park. There it is down there. You do. So they're at 100, they're at moderate. So, you know, if you were to go to the moderate tab, it would say, usually sensitive people to ozone, consider reducing your activity level. Maybe not a strenuous hike, but, you know, just mellow hike, and shorten the hike, you know, shorten the hike. So that's kind of answers that kind of question regarding our Sequoia journey at 100. So it's still not the greatest. I wanted to show you the INCIWeb website, and this shows you nationwide the fires that are happening nationwide. As you can see, if I zoom out here, the majority of fires are this side of Colorado, y'all. There's some up here in the Minnesota area, kind of like up there in those areas by Lake Superior, but the majority of the fires are here. And I just wanted to show you kind of like the Dixie Fire, this is where you would go to see the resources, where it's burning, you know, what areas is it affecting. And if we get in there nice and close on the Dixie, you'll see that it's a pretty big fire, over almost going to 1 million acres, 3/4 of 1 million acres. But as you can see, they have these footprints. They're very interesting. We call these the fingers here, but you'll see fires do that. Embers will go flying and they'll cause a spot fire. So you'll see some of these little dots, like this little island here is a spot fire. Probably caused by a spot fire, but still part of the greater fire. This one over here is a Beckworth complex, so it's a separate fire, considered a separate fire than the whole Dixie footprint, we call it. But as you can see that that's a big area. So these are some of the resources you can use when you're out there planning and seeing, what's going on out there. Well, let's see. Let's go ahead and I will go to the last of this resources here, y'all, that we looked already at. But our last slide is kind of like the question and answers. If you have any questions for us, we can take them now in the Q&A section. And I think we can, if we don't get any more questions and answers, we'll talk about the next steps in Ranger Tim's presentation. I'll have Celeste chime in on that, but you're more than welcome to put in the Q&A any questions and answers you may have regarding any of the information that was given for the presentation.
Awesome. Yeah, please go ahead and enter any questions you may have in the Q&A box. And in the meantime, I just wanted to let everybody know that we have a couple more fire resilience trainings coming up. This one was the first in a series, and the next one is going to be on September 14th, and it will be another virtual training. We will be joined by Ranger Tim from the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, and he's gonna have a chat on fire preparedness. So you'll learn the basics of home hardening, creating defensible spaces around the home, brush clearance, and creating an emergency evacuation plan. So that will be particularly helpful, really, for anybody in a fire emergency situation. And so I welcome you all to check it out at communitynatureconnection.org/trainings. You'll find that one. And then there's a another one coming up on September 30th, and that is landscaping for wildfire resilience. We're really excited to have Erin Johnson joining us from the Theodore Payne Foundation, and she is going to be talking about how to design a garden and maintain a garden using fire resilient plants. And yes, definitely check those out. Not on the fire topic, but I just also want to plug another training we have coming up, which is the Certified Interpretive Guide training. And so Community Nature Connection partners with the National Association for Interpretation, and we put on a 6-week training which will give you a professional certification in the field of interpretation. So if that's something you're interested in, again, check out our website. I'll pop it here in the chat, communitynatureconnection.org/trainings. And if you have any questions or want to talk about what that training entails, please feel free to reach out to me at training@communitynatureconnection.org. And for this training today, it is being recorded, so I will be uploading the recording of this training to CNC's YouTube channel. So you're welcome to revisit it or to share it around with anybody who you think it might be helpful for. And I will also be following up after this training with a survey that I'd love for you all to share your feedback and fill out for us, as well as all the resources, the great resources that Michael presented today that'll help you plan and prepare for your fun times in the outdoors, even during fire season. So if there are any questions, we'll be sticking around for a little bit longer.
And I think there's 2 questions that I've seen. One is in regards to wildlife. Wildlife tends to migrate to areas where there's not a burn and move away from burn areas and then repopulate the burn areas. So the question was, will I see more wildlife south of a fire? You know, are they coming that way? Well, with the Tahoe or Tamarack fire, it's quite a bit of ways from Yosemite. Probably wouldn't see the effects of that. But if there was not burned, you're probably going to see the wildlife that is from other areas, maybe migrating into non-burn areas. You might be the benefactor of that, of a place that hasn't burned. Wearing a special mask, it's almost you have to have a respirator. These are fine particulate matter. So like a buff around your mouth, it gives you kind of like that feeling like, oh, it's protecting me a little bit. But when it comes down to it, these are very, very fine, minute particles that will go right through a buff. So limiting your exercise would probably be the best. The more you're respiring, the more you respirate, the more chances you have of, really doing some damage to yourself. So I think that probably answers that. Outside, like I say, wearing a respirator, and I don't know if that would be pleasant to be hiking around Sequoia like that, but to each its own, right? I do believe those are the 2 last questions, but thank y'all. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. And a big shout out to our interpreters. Muchas gracias por hacer ese trabajo que es muy importante. It's really important to have that ability to have the translation and interpretation of what we're doing here for all our communities. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. We really appreciate you coming in and sharing your time and expertise and all the research that went into this presentation. I hope folks will share the presentation, share those resources, and take what you learned today and apply it to your next outdoor adventure. So thanks so much again, Michael, and thank you everybody for being here today. I hope you all have a great afternoon. All right, that does it. Bye-bye.